Hey guys, welcome back to RPO Restorations. Today, we'll be talking about what could be one of the most maligned engines in General Motors history. An engine that throughout its 16-year production run was almost always panned by critics and owners alike. An engine that started life as an economy offering, but went on to power just about every car line in the General Motors catalog. And perhaps this is one of the reasons why it was hated. This engine is Pontiac's 2.5-liter Iron Duke 4-cylinder. The 2.5-liter Iron Duke was conceived in the mid-70s after the first fuel crisis. At the time, Pontiac had only 8-cylinder engines in their lineup, but could see the writing on the wall when it came to looming fuel economy standards. Their engineers came up with a clean sheet design, which they claimed was developed not only with fuel economy in mind, but also to keep noise and harshness to a minimum. They looked at what other GM divisions were doing at the time, including GM of Brazil, and tried to learn what they could from the 151 cubic inch and 2.3-liter versions already in production. What they came up with was a fairly standard 2.5-liter engine with a cast iron block, 3-inch bore and 4-inch stroke, and standard valve train. In lieu of a timing chain, a set of timing gears was used. The engineers made a conscious effort to minimize friction wherever they could, and the intake manifold was designed to allow for equalized power from each cylinder. The engine was topped with a simple 2-barrel carburetor, had an 8.25 to 1 compression ratio, and was initially rated at 85 horsepower. The Iron Duke debuted in the 1977 model year on the subcompact Pontiac Astor and Sunbird and the compact Phoenix. These cars originally came equipped with a 2.3-liter Chevrolet 4-cylinder, so Pontiac actually used the Chevrolet bell housing bolt pattern on these engines rather than the traditional BOP setup. In 1978, Oldsmobile began installing them in their Monza and Starfire. For 1979, the engine's internals and cylinder head was updated, and the engine received a new 2-barrel Varijet carburetor. Power was increased to 90 horsepower. In 1980, the design was again updated so that the engines could be mounted transversely for the new front-wheel drive X cars, and the Iron Duke would serve as the base engine across the entire lineup. Also, it's worth noting that starting this year, the American Motors Corporation would begin buying these engines from GM for use in their Spirit, Concorde, and Eagle cars, and for use in the Jeep CJ models. The Iron Duke received its next major update for the 1982 model year. Its 2-barrel Varijet carburetor was replaced with the relatively new GM throttle body injection system. This resulted in a gain of 5 horsepower and greatly improved cold weather startups and drivability. As the 80s rolled on, the engine was gradually updated, receiving swirl port heads and a 9-to-1 compression bump in 1984, roller lifters, and an updated crankshaft in 1985. During this time, its use was also expanded as a base engine in more cars throughout GM's lineup. It would see service in the F-Bodies, Chevy Celebrity, and Pontiac 6000 starting in 1982, the Pontiac Fiero in 1984, the Buick Somerset, Oldsmobile Calais, and Pontiac Grand Am in 1985. It would also enter service with GM's S-Series truck lineup this year, with the S10 and S15 pickup trucks and S10 Blazer and S15 Jimmy. In 1987, the engine received its most visible update with the additions of both a single serpentine belt with a tensioner to power the engine's accessories and a distributor-less ignition system. This system included separate coils for each cylinder and incorporated a waste spark method of firing the plugs. Cylinders were paired, and the plugs on both would be fired at the same time, with one of the paired cylinders being fired at the end of the compression stroke and the other firing during the exhaust stroke. In 1988, a balance shaft was added to aid in reducing engine vibration. By 1991, the timing gears had been replaced with the traditional timing chain. Iron Duke was finally discontinued at the end of 1992, with the last engines being installed in the 1993 S-Series of light trucks. They were, however, also used until 1994 in the Grumman Postal vehicles. Yes, if you didn't know, the Grumman Postal vehicles are all powered by 2.5-liter Iron Dukes. Most are around 30 years old, and they're still on the road to this day. we're talking about are the 2.5-liter Iron Duke Super Duty race engines that Pontiac supported during the 1980s. While none were ever offered for sale in any production vehicles, you could walk up to the parts counter at your local Pontiac dealer and buy everything you needed. The actual 1984 Fiero pace car had a Super Duty Iron Duke under the hood. I've seen pieces come up for sale over the years, and I've even seen a stamped Super Duty intake for sale with my own eyes at a Carlisle event, but they are very hard to come by. Now, I'm going to tell you about 3 mistakes I think GM made with this engine when it comes to why it has a bad reputation. Keep in mind, I like them for what they were. I've owned an Iron Duke in the past and found it to be relatively simple and easy to work on, as well as adequate when it came to getting the job done. With that being said, I think GM made 3 critical mistakes when it came to this thing, which led to them being disliked by consumers, and I'm going to list them now in no particular order. Number 1 has to do with noise, vibration, and harshness. While Pontiac claimed that their engineers made a conscious effort to make this engine smooth, anyone who's ever heard one can say otherwise. You could only describe one as a tractor engine if you had to explain to someone what they sound like. It was a huge mistake not refining these things with a counterbalance right from the gate. Imagine being a GM buyer in the early 80s. You're trading in a car from the mid-70s equipped with a smooth-running Oldsmobile or Chevy V8, and the replacement car has an Iron Duke under the hood. What are you going to think? Number 2, I think GM made a big mistake placing these in their mid-size offerings. These engines would have been okay to use in the subcompact and compact cars like the X, Fiero, and the small work trucks. Maybe the N cars, but they should have never been placed in anything larger. Especially not the F cars, the Pontiac 6000 or the Cutlass Sierra. They were woefully underpowered and did more damage to the brands compared to anything else, especially when it came to competing with the imports. And finally, number 3. GM should have developed something sooner like the Quad 4 and killed these by the late 1980s. There's no reason why they should have seen more than 10 years of service, let alone 16. By the mid-80s, this was a dated design, and the Japanese were putting out a much better product. I'm sure by that point, GM had made their money back on tooling a design. They should have had something in the works and moved on. What do you guys think? Should they have kept it in the compacts and subcompacts? Should they have had something better in the works and killed it sooner? Or do you think it just is what it is? Let me know what you think of the Iron Duke in the comments section. Don't forget to tap the subscribe button on the right side of the screen. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next week.